All right. Again, hi, good morning. Well, mid-morning, early afternoon, Netroots. Welcome to Media 101, training for organizers new to talking to media. My name is Alexa Garcia Dita, and I am a principal at Conway Strategic. We are a PR and strategic communications firm based in DC with expertise in communications and messaging around abortion access, reproductive health rights, and justice issues. I am going to pass it to my co-presenter today to introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Hi, everybody. I'm Renita Shannon. I'm a state representative in Georgia, and I'm also a strategic advisor with Conway.
Awesome. Thanks, Renita. So it looks like we have about 15 folks in the room. Thank you again for joining us. We're really excited to be here with you and talk about some tips and strategies and techniques for speaking with reporters. Whoops, already. Let me just make sure. There we go. So our goals for today. So speaking to the media is an incredibly vulnerable thing. And so just by you being here just speaks volumes about how deeply passionate you are about your issue and that you want to get your message out there. And our goals for today we're going to give you some tips, techniques, show you some examples of really strong media interviews so that you can be your most authentic self when talking to reporters. So again, we'll walk through some best practices, give you some tips for speaking to print, TV, and radio journalists. And a couple things before we get started. So these slides will be available and the session is being recorded. So, just feel free to sit back, listen, take it all in. You'll have access to these materials afterward. And one other thing that we'll say, like I said, Conway Strategic specializes in communications and messaging and media relations around abortion access and reproductive health rights and justice issues. So those are the examples you'll see throughout our presentation today. But just know that, I know all of you are working in a variety of different issue areas. What we talk about is applicable across issue areas: criminal justice, healthcare, LGBTQ issues, all those things. So you should feel free to take in everything that you learned today and apply it to your specific issue. This is also being recorded, so that will be available to you as well. So again, no need to be taking notes. Just relax and take it all in. Okay, so before we dive into the specifics around what makes really strong messages and tips and techniques for the different formats, I wanted to just go over a couple of basics around doing interviews with the media, speaking to reporters. First and foremost, interviews, it's important to think about interviews not as conversations. I know that sounds a little counterintuitive. You are speaking literally, right, one-on-one to a reporter, to another person, but it's not a conversation with that reporter. That journalist that you're talking to is not your audience, right? Your audience are their readers. Your audience are their viewers. Your audience are their listeners. So it's just important to keep that in mind when you're talking to a journalist. You're not trying to convince them of anything, right? See them and understand them as the vehicle to get your core message, your policy ask, your story and perspective to the broader public, to the folks that are reading their piece, for example. You also walk into interviews with all the answers, regardless of what questions are asked of you. And again, what we walk through today will be tools that you can use and develop before interviews to set you up to have all the answers before you even get your first question. A couple more things to keep in mind. Really think about, and again, use the tools that we walk through today to prepare and think about how you are responding to their questions, how you are delivering your answers and core messages, clear, concise, talking points and messages are essential because you only have a limited time with reporters, right? So we're just gonna, again, give you the tips and techniques. to refine your answers and your messages. And again, walk in ready to deliver them. Before we dive in, we just wanted to share an example of a recent interview, very timely right now, to get us started and sort of level set on what makes a really strong interview.
Large scale testing. Now, what we hear every night is that that there are millions of tests available, and yet we don't have that pinprick blood test that you can just sort of get, at your local doctor and know in 15 minutes. But they're working on it.
Yeah, they're working on it. They should have been working on it for months. So the fact is, we knew about this from the WHO when? December 31st, 2019. So last year, we knew about this. We knew coronavirus is coming. We knew it was a respiratory disease. We knew it was person to person. Why is it that it's this week that the FDA finally approved these kind of new Abbott lab testing, which, by the way, is one test at a time? It's a great test, but it's one test at a time. It's different than the labs that are doing mass testing, right? So this is a wonderful test. Don't get me wrong, but it's one test per 15 minutes. That's wonderful, but it's not the same volume that you really need. This is better for kind of outpatient clinics and things like that. We needed this months ago. You look at Korea, South Korea and the US had their first official confirmed case on the same date, January 19th. That means since January 19th, you look at what South Korea did and what we did. Their population is 1/6 of ours. Look at the cases they have. Look at the mortality they have. It's a trifle compared to what we're dealing with right now, because we've had a very weak response and they had a really strong response.
Doctor, thank you. Very interesting to talk to you, Dr. Desai. Hope you'll come back as well.
So, if you have any reactions and want to share them in the chat, please feel free. And also, I should have mentioned this at the top. Please feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A function of the of Zoom, and we can we'll address them at the end. But the reason we wanted to show you this interview, one, and aside from it being incredibly timely, is that you'll notice a couple things. One, Fox News. Potentially hostile situation for Dr. Desai, right? Ahead of time, we know they're gonna potentially bring some ill-framed, poorly framed, ill-informed questions, potentially peddle some of the myths and lies about the coronavirus that were happening early on, right? But you'll notice Dr. Desai just owned that interview. He walked in, he had his answers. Oops, I'm so sorry. And he walked in, he had his answers, and he just stayed on his message to the point where the reporter was so stumped by the end, right, that she just ended the interview. And so this is just an example, again, of being really strong in your points. He delivered them clearly, concisely, slowly, and we'll walk through that shortly, what makes a strong TV interview. But we wanted to share that as one example. And again, you can walk into a potentially hostile interview with these tools and just own it. All right, I'm gonna pass it to Renita to walk us through some message tips.
Thank you, Alexa. And so because, as Alexa said, interviews are not conversations, you do need a very strong vehicle to get your message across. And so today I'm going to teach you about how to use a message triangle to effectively communicate in interviews. Before we start, I do want to mention that using something like a message triangle is really important, because when you conduct interviews, whether it be with radio or TV, generally the clips that you end up seeing that make it out to the public are very short periods within the interview. So they may record you for 30 minutes and then they are looking for clips that they can just grab and use to make great TV or great radio. And basically the goal is not to bore the listener. So if you don't have a really strong vehicle to get your message across, you'll end up rambling and you'll end up not getting your point out to the public. So that's what we're going to discuss today, is using a message triangle, which is going to be your vehicle for effective communication. So when you use a message triangle, you want to think about your core message, which is your core value. And you see that that's in the center of the triangle. This is the core value that you are trying to communicate to listeners. As we talk a lot about leading with values, shared values particularly, because those are easier for the public to accept. And so when you're building your message triangle, you want to start with, what is your core value? Ask yourself that question. So that goes in the middle, and that's generally what you would start with when you are building a message triangle and when you are articulating a message triangle. The next thing you want to do is you want to figure out your vision and your values. So on the left side of the triangle, you will see that the vision and the values, and I'll give you an example of a fully fleshed out message triangle on the next slide, but we're just going to talk about how to build each slide right now. The vision and values, basically think of that as the future that you want to see. Think of that as what you are ultimately, what you're ultimately working towards. The problem and the impact would be the issue that we are currently facing that's stopping the vision or the value that you really want to have happen come to fruition. So the problem impact, really easy way to think of it would be pointing out those who are in opposition to whatever it is that your whatever your core message is. And then finally, because you don't want to just come out and talk about a bunch of problems and a vision and without a solution, you want to build a solution. And so the solution part of the triangle basically talks about what is your policy recommendation, for example, what is your recommendation of what needs to happen in order to get back to the vision. So you start by stating your core message, then you go to the vision and the values, then you talk about your problem impact, and then you talk about your solution. And so basically what you're doing is you are taking the public through almost like a story. You start with the value, you bring them up with the vision, you bring them down with the problem and the impact, and then you bring them back up with the solution. Next slide, please.
Go.
So here's an example of a fully built message triangle. And like we said before, you know, this, because Conway does work on abortion issues, this is something that can be used with any issue. So we're just going to give you examples that are examples today that are built around abortion rights. So let's look at our core message. The core message is, when someone decides to have an abortion, it should be safe, affordable, and free from punishment or judgment. Okay, so that's the core value. The vision and the value: living a safe and healthy life is a basic right, as is the freedom to define our own path. So you can see that that's very uplifting, and it's talking about the point that we actually want to get to. So then we jump over to the impact, which again, remember, is about the problem that you're pointing out of, like, what's happening, what's stopping us from getting to the vision or values. So the impact statement is, anti-abortion politicians will stop at nothing to push abortion care out of reach or ban it outright. And then finally, bring it back down to the solution. So the solution could go like this: but with increased threats to abortion care, we need to protect women's health and ensure that abortion care remains safe and legal. Now, when it's important that you build your message triangles before you actually get into these interviews, because it will take you a little time. I do recommend to build each side individually. And I will also say that it takes more time in the beginning when you start to use these message triangles, but after you get into the pattern of building message triangles, you'll be able to build them very quickly, and it won't take a lot of time. Next slide.
Can I add one quick note, Renita, also on the core message? You know, one way to think about this too is, if there's one thing that you want a journalist to quote in their story about what you're saying, that would go in the center of the triangle, and that's what you repeat as often as possible. And again, regardless of the question, right, we'll talk about ways to get you back on what's on your message triangle regardless of the question that's asked. But that's just one additional way to think about what would go in the core, in the center, is that thing you just want to repeat over and over again. That's what you want quoted, would go in the middle.
Yes, and that's very important. Thanks for pointing that out, Alexa, because if you do an interview where you are rambling and you sort of don't have a core message, or you don't have something that you're consistently repeating, journalists have a tendency to summarize what you said, and sometimes they get it right and sometimes they get it wrong, and then it's really hard to retract messages once it's already in print. So that's why it's so important to be prepared before you go into interviews with media, and to have a straightforward, strategic, and succinct message. Next slide.
Okay. We have a little example for you.
So, Dr. Fauci, we know that there are 20 million measles cases.
I'm sorry, Renita, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so now we have a video of Dr. Fauci articulating an effective message triangle. And so we'll show you how it should be done. Go ahead.
around the world every year. But what does a theme park like a Disneyland do to make sure that the parents and children that are visiting from the United States or from other countries are safe?
You know, it really relates to the fact that this happens because children are not vaccinated. The overwhelming number of people who have gotten infected, particularly among the children, are children that have not been vaccinated because parents, for reasons that are really not based on any scientific data, just don't want their children to be vaccinated. And it's really unfortunate because vaccination can prevent all of this. One of the things we do know about measles is that the vaccine that we have is one of the most effective vaccines we have for any viral disease or for any microbe. So this all can have been shut down if people had gotten vaccinated. That's the real critical issue.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see in this example, the reporter is focusing
Dr.
on.
Fauci, we know that there
I'm
are
so sorry. Go ahead,
20
Renita.
million measles.
Oh, there you go.
You can see in this interview, the reporter has in mind what he wants to talk about, and he's focusing on a very specific issue about theme parks. Dr. Fauci, you can tell he comes right in, and his key message is you need to vaccinate your children. So it almost doesn't matter what the reporter is talking about. They're trying to drive you in a certain direction, but you have to remember you are not there to speak to the reporter. This is not a conversation. You're there to get your message out to the public. It almost doesn't matter what they are talking about. You've got a mission to complete, which is getting out your message. And you can see in this video that Dr. Fauci's message that he said over and over again is you need to vaccinate your children. Next slide.
What I love about this video, I counted, he said vaccine or vaccinate 7 times. So that this is a really, like Renita said, such a strong example of repetition of your core message.
Right. And so you want to think of yourself as almost like a, it's like when you look at commercials, they just say the same thing over and over and over again, and then it sinks in your head. And so that is what you're really trying to do, is basically become a living, walking, talking commercial in these interviews, so that when people walk away from the interview, they're going to remember exactly what your point was. So now we're going to talk about some message tips, do's and don'ts. You do want to use a message triangle. Do not walk into interviews with nothing planned, because you will end up rambling. So you want to make sure you have your message triangle ready to go. You want to repeat your message. This is the best way to make sure that reporters are going to grab your key message, is if you repeat it. Focus on your point, not just the question. So again, it almost doesn't matter what they are talking about. You need to focus on what message you're trying to communicate and the values that you're trying to communicate to the public. You want to illustrate your points, because this is a good way to keep the audience engaged, and so that they actually are going on a journey with you, and so that they can really imagine what it is that you're saying. And of course, illustrating your points just makes the interview not boring. So it's a great way to entertain folks, which means people will likely watch the end of the video to catch your full message. And then use the 3 C's. You want to be colorful. You can use cliches, use contemporary pop references. I mean, that's a really great way to get your interview picked up to a further audience than who you're talking to, is if you use pop references, because who knows, if someone may see that, especially the person that you're talking about, and they may appreciate that you brought them into their interview or into your interview. So let's talk about what you should not do. You do not want to use technical terms and acronyms. You got to remember, these messages are built for the public, and the public does not have as much expertise as you do. So you do not want to use acronyms, because they may have no idea what you're talking about. And you don't want to use overly technical terms. You want to use layman's terms. You want to use just basic, think about using language that even a child can understand. You don't want to get into the weeds. Again, stay on track. Stay using your message that you're trying to articulate. Getting into the weeds and going off on tangents is going to ruin your media experience. You also do not want to speculate. It's important to just talk about what it is that you actually know, because when you speculate, that has a tendency to take the interview off into a whole other area, and then that could become the story, something that you said that wasn't quite right. So if an interviewer asks you something that you are not really sure what the answer is, you can literally say, well, I'm not sure about what you just asked me, but what I do know is, and then you go right back to the message that you're trying to articulate. You also do not want to repeat the opposition's language. Again, this is a branding exercise. And if you're actually thinking of yourself like a living, walking, talking commercial, then you don't want to advertise for your opponent. They're trying to brand whatever it is that they want folks to start using and make it a part of everyday vernacular. You do not want to help them. Don't become a commercial for them. Become a commercial for what you want to get out. You don't use no comment on the background, or off the record, because that gives a feel to the interview like it's not authentic. So you kind of want to just stay away from that kind of stuff. And then you also don't want to refuse to answer a question. Viewers hate this because it feels like you either are not sure about what you're talking about, or it feels like you have something to hide. So you want to make sure to be honest. So if it's a case of where you don't know the answer to what the interviewer is asking you, just say that, but don't refuse to answer a question.
Can I add one note about the no comment off the record for folk, in case folks don't know what the difference is between on background and off the record. So, obviously on the record is when you are, doing your interview, your 10-minute interview with the reporter. Off the record is a philosophy across media that is obvious, that is, it's a principle that most reporters adhere to, and it's intended to sort of say, to acknowledge that anything that comes after you say the phrase off the record would not appear in the story. And again, it's most media, most journalists adhere to that principle. Most reporters are not walking into interviews trying to trap you, right? But it's important to remember, you walk into every interview, anything you say in those few minutes, maybe before, when you're just sort of, chatting with the reporter before they ask their first question, or that wrap up chat that might happen after the last one, just treat any and all interactions with reporters as on the record, and in that you wouldn't want anything you say, whether it's, again, in response to a question or at the beginning or end, that you wouldn't want to see in the story. Again, most reporters are not trying to put you in that position, but it's just something to, it's important to just keep in mind and just treat any and all communication with a journalist as on the record. That way, again, you don't get into a situation where you didn't mean to say something and then it appears in the story, that kind of thing. And on background, same thing. You don't really want to get into that situation either. If a reporter says, on background, or, oh, this is only on background, just lean into that message triangle. Anything you say that you wouldn't want to see in the story, just leave it at the door.
So we are quickly running out of time. So we're going to try to get through these last slides. If someone asks you something that almost feels like a gotcha question, or if it feels like they are trying to specifically take you off on a tangent or get their message out, which is opposite of what you want, for example, think of Fox News interviewer, then you want to use a pivot. And all pivot means is that you are going to, no matter what they say, what tangent they try to take you down, you're going to go back to what message you are trying to communicate. And so you want to use something called block and pivot, which means, number one, you're going to say no to what it is that they're saying and let them set the record straight. And then you want to pivot back to your message. And so the best way to think about this is, and here are some examples of effective pivots. You can say the real issue is, or you can say, when people ask that, they are often concerned about, and that's a way to block, okay? And then a final pivot, which is very, very popular, is here's what I do know, and then you go back to your message. So we're going to show you a video of what it looks like to do an effective pivot, and then that way it'll make more sense to you.
One of the opponents to the law, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Doctor, she said she's a state lawmaker. We've had her on Bold before. She talked about the fact that this law also decriminalizes abortion, so takes it out of the criminal code. And she said this could result in, for example, if a woman is assaulted and her child is killed by the assaulter, there would be no ramification or prosecution of this assaulter who killed her unborn child. Doesn't that bother you?
Well, what I can say, again, bringing it back to the fact that I'm a physician, I can't speak as a legal expert, but what I can say is that almost every day I see women who come in to the clinic who need abortion care, who come to me telling their stories about what uniquely brings them to that point in their life. And, you know, as a doctor, as an abortion provider, it is not my decision to decide what's best for this person's life or this person's life. I'm there as a physician to help provide compassionate care to that person when she needs it. And honestly, it continually shocks me that people think it is okay for me to be the person who judges what's right for that person's life.
I have a question for Nick.
So that example was a perfect pivot. The interviewer asked Dr. Conti a question that was meant to make her
One
seem.
of the opponents to the law, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Doctor.
The interviewer asked Dr. Conti a question that was, if she would have answered and gone off on that tangent, was meant to make her seem like she was uncaring about this specific situation of a pregnant person being hurt. And that seems like an easy question to answer, but it's not the best thing in the interview to do to answer that. And so quickly, Dr. Conti, she pivoted and she said, listen, right off the bat, I'm not a legal expert, which means she's saying, I'm not going to get into criminal law with you, and that's not what I'm here for. But what I do know is, and then she goes back to her point. And so she did an excellent job of pivoting and redirecting the interview back to the message that she wants to get out to the public. And it was extremely effective.
You said she's a state lawmaker. We've had her on Bold before. She talked about.
Okay. I am seeing some really great questions in the chat, and as soon as we get through these last slides, we will dig right in. So thank you so much for adding in those questions, and we will address them shortly. Okay, so let's get into some specifics about tips for doing interviews on TV, interviews on the radio, and then finally print interviews, and then we'll do some wrap-up tips before we dig into your questions. So best practices for TV. You know, the first thing we would say is that, TV, there's live TV, right? And then there's recorded interviews. So a couple things to keep in mind. You have your message triangle, right? Obviously you can't walk into a TV interview holding it or using it, but it's important to practice, use that triangle as you're preparing. And again, use and have the pivots that some of the pivots that Renita just walked through, sort of identify it ahead of time, that whatever question that you get asked by a broadcast journalist, you can refer back to your message triangle. A couple of things about 65% of what people come away with from a TV interview is their impression of you. Do they like you? Do they trust you? Are you appearing confident? And so, that's just the nature of TV. Unfortunately, we are dealing with an audience that general public that can apply stereotypes, especially to women and who are on TV doing interviews. Your authority and confidence. There's just a couple things that we recommend that you do to convey that authority and confidence to the viewers, because again, they're really judging what they see first and then what they hear. So a TV, it's important to, if you're comfortable, smile. Again, that's just the confidence and authority that conveys. The video flattens you. So anything we can do to sort of put viewers at ease, unfortunately, is best, smiling being one thing. You also want to stay still. Any movement is highly magnified on TV. So nodding, we don't recommend nodding, and just want to be mindful of that. We also don't recommend, hand gestures, because again, really magnified for the viewer. It's important too to speak slowly and clearly and pause. Now, we walk into these interviews, right, with our expertise, with our stories, with our answers, and we're excited to get our messages out to these audiences. And when we know something and want to deliver our message and are deeply passionate, our tendency can be to speak quickly and speak loudly. But again, on TV, that just comes across as really magnified, and so we just, recommend that you be mindful of the speed and cadence in which you're talking. Slow, short sentences, pausing between sentences. It's also important to maintain eye contact. Now, some TV interviews, you know, you would set this up with the journalist and the producer before, but you know, if you're speaking to the interviewer, the journalist, it's important to maintain eye contact with them versus the camera itself, right? Or sometimes you'll be doing interviews over Zoom these days, Skype, and then in that regard, you would want to maintain eye contact with the camera. So just, you know, eye contact, whether you're speaking to a camera or the journalist themselves, and again, that's something that would be set up before you start, right? You know, you can who should I be looking at? Where should I be looking? Can help you get clear on that before the interview starts, and then just maintaining that eye contact throughout. We also recommend sitting up straight. So if you are doing an interview where you're seated with the journalist, sitting on the end of your chair with both feet on the ground, leaning slightly forward, keeps your energy up. It keeps your breathing clear and your diaphragm open. So again, just a couple of tips, because again, most of what people are taking away from a TV interview is their impression of you. Some other best practices and things to think about when you're on TV and you're on the screen is what to wear. We recommend solid colors. For the most part, jewel tones work really, really well. And it's really important to understand the lighting that, if you can, if they provide that information ahead of time, get that. Renita, did you want to jump in and add a couple things?
Sure. So one of the things that Black and brown folks need to understand about lighting is that literally, unless you are filming with Oprah or Tyler Perry, most of the lighting has been built for white skin. So what that means is you do have to find a way to reflect light into your face in order for you to look the best on camera. So one of the things you can do is, if you want, you can wear like a white shirt so the lighter the color, it reflects the face. So basically the combination is you want to wear something dark and then something light in the middle, because that contrast allows you to reflect light into your face. So think black blazer, white shirt, just whatever combination, but you want to provide that contrast. So lighting is not built for you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Renita. And a couple more quick tips. If you're going into the studio, for example, you can ask if makeup will be provided or offered, touch-ups will be offered. If makeup isn't part of your routine, that's totally fine. If you have a little bit of powder to just dab on your face before to just prevent any shine, that's recommended. But again, do what is most comfortable for you. And then as far as your hairstyle, it's important that you don't have any flyaways. Oops, I'm so sorry. In your face, so you want to make sure your full face is shown, tucked, hair tucked behind your ears, just to, again, and out of your eyes, excuse me. Renita, did you want to jump in here too?
Sure. Again, just to reiterate, because it took so long for Black and brown folks to actually get on main TV, most of the lighting and most of the assistance before you go on camera is still primarily built for white people. And so you, as a woman of color, it's very important that you look your best. It's important for everyone to look their best when you're on camera. And so one of the things you can do to reduce stress and to make sure that you will look appropriate on camera is to just do your hair before you get there. Should you have to do that? No, but the consequences of not doing that could mean that you end up working with someone who has no idea how to do your hair, and that is just you're gonna end up being unhappy. So I always do my hair before I film anything. I don't even let them touch my hair. I handle my hair before I get there.
So thanks, Renita. Mm-hmm. For the sake of time, I'm wondering, Renita, should we jump past this video and dig into radio and print so we can answer some questions?
Sure.
Okay, and we can make this available for folks. This is on YouTube, and so we'll put it in the chat before we wrap up. Oh, well, and it's just going to start anyway, isn't it? All right, some best practices for radio. So obviously what makes radio different about TV is that no one can see you, right, when you're doing a radio interview. So this is a perfect example of when you can have your message triangle right in front of you. You can walk around your house, be on the phone with the radio reporter, and be holding your triangle so that, again, whatever question is asked of you, you've got your answers right in front of you. And you can read verbatim if that feels right for you. You can also have your pivots written down so you can look right at them. Again, whatever question's asked of you, you've got your one phrase that acknowledges the question and quickly gets you back to your core message. A couple things that seem counterintuitive about doing radio, but really help you come off as a strong messenger. Again, no one can see you, so this sounds silly, but smiling while you are conducting a radio interview actually comes through in your voice. Again, it conveys that authority, that confidence, and helps you connect with the listener. It just does something to the sound of your voice. So again, sounds funny because no one can see you, but smile while you're doing a radio interview. Standing up and walking around, same thing, because no one can see you. This is something you can do to keep your energy up. To again, keep that authority and confidence, or convey that authority and confidence. Your voice, the same thing that we walked through for TV applies here. Speaking slowly, pausing for emphasis, just really make sure that you're not getting into a situation where you're rambling and you're being clear to the listener. One thing about radio too, we know that radio folks will edit their clips down to sound bites, right? So it's important here especially to be really precise. And you can identify your radio soundbite before you even go into an interview. Maybe that's your core message, and you refine it and you say that one sentence over and over again. And obviously you can use your notes. All right, we want to just listen to a quick snippet of a really strong radio interview in response to a potentially hostile question.
Out there. Obviously, there's a group of people in this country that are opposed to abortion. What do you say to those people? Because there are a lot of them listening to our show right now who are opposed to probably what you stand for. What do you say to them in terms of trying to justify that somehow abortion is okay, that somehow they should change their thinking on that, or somehow that having these clinics is a good thing for the community?
Right. I mean, what I definitely know is that we all have our opinions or really strong beliefs about pregnancy and abortion. But regardless of what we all believe, I think one thing that we can all agree on is that we should be able to self-determine and have autonomy over our decisions that are best not only for ourselves, but our families without any biases or barriers.
All right, so you heard the cadence in Oriako's voice, really strong core message and value statement to, again, acknowledge the question, but not, get into a place where she's buying into this idea of someone being anti-abortion, right? She's pivoting back to that shared value.
Out there that this was not a...
Oh my goodness. Okay. A couple more best practices, and we've got a couple questions and then about 10 minutes or so left. So for print, a couple things here. Obviously, you can use your notes because no one can see you. This isn't recorded, so you don't have, so the smiling and standing up and walking around doesn't apply here. However, leaning into the core messages, having your pivots ready so that you can answer any question that's asked of you and get your core messages out there is still key here. Again, remembering that your audience is not the print reporter that you're speaking to, it is their reader. And so, again, just being mindful of that. And then here with print especially, you don't want to get into a situation where you're spending so much time on the phone with a print reporter. TV and radio will have specific time constraints. You should feel free to set up and walk into an interview with a print journalist whose piece will be in writing, online, and saying, look, I have about 10 minutes today to speak with you. Thank you so much for reaching out. Just to keep that time on the phone with them really short. So you're not getting into a situation where the longer you're staying on the phone with a journalist, the more likely it is that you might veer off message. So again, keeping the interview short, 10 minutes is a good rule of thumb, is a good practice. Yeah. And then just quickly, you know, when you wrap up, keeping interviews short, a lot of reporters, print especially, might ask the question, you know, their final question might be something along the lines of, is there anything I missed? Is there anything else you think I should know? And while, you know, you've just spent 10 minutes on the phone with them repeating yourself, right? You're repeating your core messages. The tendency might be here to say, no, I'm done. Like I covered it all. That was great. And, you know, hang up the phone. But if you get that kind of question, just think of it as one more opportunity to get your core message out there. And then just say, you can say something like, no, you know, like I said, or I just wanted to reiterate that, and then you're back on your core message and what's on your triangle. Thanking the interviewer, of course, is recommended. And then, you know, if you are in touch with them one-on-one over email, following up quickly is best, just to, again, acknowledge and thank them for reaching out to you. If there was ever a point in the interview where you saw, you know, you talked about you sending them additional resources, research, additional materials that will help their story, once you wrap up, just shoot those over email to the reporter. Thanks so much. Here are those additional resources that I mentioned. It's just another way to be courteous and wrap up your interview. All right, so we've got some questions in the chat, super exciting. So Stephen's point, are there any tips or strategies for being able to counter a hostile interviewer without causing them to end the interview? That's a great question. We all would have loved to hear more from Dr. Desai, right? Unfortunately, you don't know if the journalist is on TV is just gonna end an interview after you just completely own them. You know, if you are presented though with a hostile question, you've got those pivots in front of you, your pivot phrases that you've practiced, that you can, again, block their hostile question and then get back to your core message. Again, it's hard to know when a journalist, and if it will even cut off an interview after one or two questions. But when in doubt, pivot back to your core message. Renita, would you add anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wouldn't worry about this too much because nowadays news and media is a lot about entertainment. I mean, think back decades ago where it was just like, just the news, just the facts, and nobody was trying to entertain you. Nowadays they are. And so if you end up in some sort of back and forth, I mean, that's the kind of stuff they want to capture anyways. So it's just important to get your message out. And if you use a message triangle, even if you get a reporter that does cut you off and say, I'm done with this interview because they're upset with you, hey, at least you got your message out.
Yeah. Ember asks, how does this translate to a written interview where the journalist could edit what they choose to include? So that is something, right, that happens in a print interview, just to be mindful that can happen, which is why the prep and your message triangle is so key to have in front of you in your notes. So that you can literally, if it's comfortable for you, if you've practiced, you can read it verbatim. And, you know, if you get into a situation where you feel like a chunk of what your quote is either missing, or, you know, they sort of like, they pull out the middle of it and it's taken out of context, that could be something that you deal with them after the fact. But unfortunately, you can't control that in the moment, right? And the reporter is also never going to print their own question, which is why pivots in your core message is like will work every time, right? Because their audience is never going to know whether you're directly answering their direct question or not. They're just going to print what you say, right? So which is if you stick to your core messages that are on your triangle, you'll be in good shape.
And one of the things that I like to do, here are two things that for me are best practices. When I'm doing a written interview, I tell the reporter, listen, give me your email address. Let me email you a quote. I always email them a quote because that way you've got your own words right there in print so that they don't have to try to summarize what you said. As progressives, we are advancing issues that are sometimes new for folks. And so it's really important that someone is not mischaracterizing what you said. So I always ask them, you know, I say to them, if they say, can I get a quote? yes, let me email you a quote. Even if they don't ask, I say, let me email you a quote. And the other thing is, I also tell them, please don't chop up my quote. Please print my entire quote. I mean, it's a privilege for them to interview you. So it's fine to make these demands. And I do it all the time.
Great. Thanks, Renita. Another question, can you offer any tips on how to handle questions when a reporter is known for wanting to stir up drama or get folks to throw shade instead of focus on an issue or debate at hand, such as you wouldn't say this person's really irresponsible? What I think Emma's asking here is, how do you maybe set the record straight if a reporter brings an opposition framing or introduces a myth or a lie in their question? I think that might be what you're getting at, Emma, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But instead of acknowledging that myth or that lie or repeating it, if you're noticing an inaccuracy in their question, one way you could address something like that is to say, you know what, I get that question all the time. I'm really excited to help set the record straight for your readers. And then you're back to a place where what's on your core message, and you're acknowledging that you were asked something, right? But you're not leaning into the opposition's frame or the myth that might be wrapped into that question. A reporter may or may not know they're doing that. But if you're trying to address an inaccuracy, setting the record straight, or I'm really glad I'm here to help set the record straight, or, that's something I hear all the time. Let me address that with you. And then again, so I think that might be where you're headed with the question, Emma. Thank you for that. Renita, would you have anything to add?
No.
Okay. Can you share some pointers on how to handle media and an event where you're not prepared? You by no means have to accept an interview on the spot. If a reporter walks up to you and says, I'm from, KXAN here in Austin, or TV journalist, do you have 5 minutes to talk? You can say, you know what, I'm a little tied up right now. Let me come find you in about 20 minutes. That way it gives yourself a window of time to prepare, get things straight, and then decide if you want to do it. If a journalist calls you and says, hey, I'm working on that deadline, about the criminal justice bill that's moving in the legislature today, do you have 5 minutes to talk? You can say, I'm a little busy right now. Thanks so much for reaching out. What's your deadline? What's your phone number? I'll call you back in 30 minutes if that works. So if you're ever in a situation where you're approached by a reporter and they're trying to force you to talk to them right then, you do not have to do that. Let's see. Joanna asks, Latinx culture, we move our hands and move around while talking. On Latinx networks, do we have to code switch and be still? You do whatever is comfortable for you and whatever makes you feel like your most authentic self. Our tips are just framed around the fact that the video and TV, the movements are magnified, but if that's who you are and that's what, makes sense for you in the moment, just do what feels comfortable. Renita, would you add anything?
Yeah, I would add that we're not telling you not to use your hands and move around while talking to get you to code switch. No, the key to these interviews is to be authentic. The reason we're saying that is because for some reason on video, if you are nodding your head, like let's say if the reporter is talking to you and you're agreeing with what they say, let's say it's a friendly interview and you're nodding yes and you're moving around, it's distracting on video. That's the only reason we're telling you that. For some reason in person, that's not the case. I use my hands to talk. It's more fun. It makes me feel more comfortable. I'm taking up more space, which I like to do. So in person, it's just a different story. But on video, for some reason, it is very distracting if you are nodding your head in agreement, shaking your head no, or using your hands to talk, because people are really trying to intently, listen to what you have to say. And so the minute your hands go up, then it's like, see, like it's, I'm doing it now. You're like, oh, what was that? So that's the reason why we're saying that. So it's not at all about code switching. And it's something that I still have to work on when I do media, because I get very passionate about this stuff. And I mean, I can get in there, I can get my face going. I'm like, yeah. It's like you have to remember, okay, if I do that, they are not going to hear this message that I want them to hear. So yeah, practice, practice, practice.
Yeah, same here. I'm also a big, hand gesturer, and just have to, again, just be mindful of how it may be distracting, but Renita's right. We're in no way asking you to not be your authentic self. So Emma clarified her question. Recently, some reporter has been seeking for me to throw shade instead of talking about the issue, or is throwing shade the best way to get press these days? I wouldn't recommend throwing shade just because it might not come across that way in the final piece. Again, your message triangle is your best friend in these interviews. You put everything you want to cover on your message triangle and you'll be set. And then have your pivots ready to get you back to your triangle, whatever the question is. If the reporter's trying to draw some, something out of you that you don't want to go down that road, that's what your message triangle is there to help you stay on track. Okay. We are 1 minute past time. If there's any last questions, we can answer them. But again, this will be recorded and available. And then I believe you all have our contact information and can find us on the app, and we can answer any other questions offline. All right, sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your conference.